We're live with another Tech Talks. Yay. Today we're going to do the first part of a two-parter on rubrics. Next week, we're going to talk specifically about the new rubric interface in Canvas, which I think is super cool. I've been playing with. I think it's well worth turning it on, and we'll talk about that next week. But I think first you have to have something that you want to put into the rubric tool. So today we're just going to talk about kind of the theory and practice of designing a rubric. I don't know how well this is going to work, but I'm going to try to build one live as we talk through. Yeah. I mean, I have, like a cooking show, I have one prepared in advance, but I'm going to try to do the steps live. Okay, so first of all, why might you want to use rubrics? Let's put it that way. Not necessarily should you, because it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Gotcha. But there are some advantages to rubrics in certain circumstances. I think most importantly, it is a really great transparency in teaching tool. It sets really clear expectations for your students on what is expected of them on an assignment. Before they do the assignment or do the discussion post or whatever thing you have a rubric attached to, they can view that rubric and they can see how they're going to be assessed, what you're looking for as evidence of learning, and where their grade is going to come from. So I think that there's a lot of value to that. The second thing that I think rubrics are good for is they increase rater reliability. In other words, how you as an individual are rating multiple students who are all working on the same assignment. It's really easy to accidentally let bias creep in, even just if you're hungry and hangry and it's lunchtime and you haven't eaten yet, you might grade a little bit more harshly. Or if you and I've had this happen to myself, you caught a student cheating, you noticed they were plagiarizing or using AI, and now your mood is ruined, and now you're going to be super judgy on all the remaining assignments when you're grading it. So having a well-designed rubric and following that rubric as you are assessing each student, I think reduces the possibility of that kind of bias. But I will say as a caveat, it doesn't eliminate bias. And bias can creep into the design of your rubric as you're building it and writing it. So, you don't fool yourself into saying that this is a perfect tool, but it can help a lot. And then I think lastly, but definitely not least, it saves so much time. If you have a good rubric and you're using it to grade, personally, I use it to grade discussion activities all the time. And it saves me so much time to have the rubric added to SpeedGrader. I'm looking at each student's work. I'm going down the rubric, boom, 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 write a little bit of comment, hit submit, and it turns it into a grade. They get all that feedback from the rubric, and I move on to the next student, and it can save literal hours once you have a good rubric built. It can be a good component of regular and substantive interaction. We talk about RSI sometimes. It's more or less on the top of people's minds, but a good rubric paired with individualized feedback is excellent regular and substantive interaction. I will also say it's not always appropriate for every situation. I'm not saying you should always use a rubric for every single kind of assignment or activity. And if I have time, we'll talk about that later. But just to say, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I'm not telling you should definitely go around and turn around and build a rubric tomorrow and start using it immediately. But it's something to think about. There are different kinds of rubrics, including holistic, non-grading rubrics, single-point rubrics, complete rubrics for doing specs grading. Today, I'm just going to focus on kind of a traditional analytic rubric, just because that's probably the most commonly seen kind. It's not the only kind. It's not always the most appropriate kind for every situation, but that's what I'm going to build today. So I'm going to start building a rubric. Specifically, I'm going to build a rubric for use in an online discussion activity. When I adjunct teach my class, it's an online asynchronous class. Most of the assignments are discussion board based. So I need to have a good rubric for that. So let's do that. Let's share my screen. Oops. Nope, not that button. That button.
It's fun to watch it fight you in real time.
Yeah, okay. So I just have a blank Google Doc open here. I could also use Excel. I could use Microsoft Word. I could use a piece of paper and write it out if I wanted to. I'm just going to use Google Docs because it's easy to use and I'm comfortable with it. I will also say that most of what I'm gonna be doing here comes from an excellent article, and you know what, let me find my link for that. Excellent article from Wolf and Stevens, The Role of Rubrics in Advancing and Assessing Student Learning. This is a great resource for the theory and pedagogy behind rubric design. I'll put it in the chat and I'll put it on the video description later on too. Okay, cool. So I have a blank page. Where do I get started with this? Well, what I think is helpful to start with is think about the objectives and goals of the assignment, right? We could be talking about actual formal learning objectives, but also just kind of the goal of doing the assignment in the first place. So when it comes to a discussion assignment, I'm thinking to myself, why do I do discussions in an online asynchronous class? And to me, there's kind of 3, maybe 4 goals for doing a discussion. The first one is I want evidence that my students are engaging with and reflecting on the course content, right? I want to know that they're actually doing the readings, watching the videos, and thinking about them. There's different ways I could assess that, but one way is a discussion. But I also want my students to engage with each other in a substantive way. You know, it's an asynchronous class, it's online, they're not sitting in a room together, they're not chatting. So if I want them to interact with each other, I need to give them an activity or a space to do that. So a discussion forum fills that need. So those are kind of my 2 goals for why I would do a discussion in the first place. So if I want to do a discussion and if I want to know that it's working successfully, then I need to be able to assess, are they engaging with the content? Are they engaging with each other? And then in addition to that, I probably need some kind of metric for, are they participating at the level that I would like them to participate? And then because it is a written discussion, I probably need to have some kind of standard for writing quality or writing mechanics. But I'm not an English instructor, I'm not a lit instructor, and it's not a writing intensive class. So that's not high on my priorities. And also I don't feel like I'm the best editor in the world, so I'm not going to be extremely nitpicky about that. But I do want students to at least follow some basic grammar, punctuation, writing mechanics, citation stuff, so that at least what they're producing makes sense well enough that people can read it and understand it. It's not confusing or distracting, right? So I need to have something there. I don't just want them to post a sentence fragment with no punctuation or capitalization. I want them to put a little bit of effort into it.
You're standardizing the format like in Canvas when you're asking for an assignment submission in a Word doc. It's so you can actually get what you need out of it.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yep. Oh no, the Zoom link for this meeting is incorrect. Had to go way back. Oh no, well that's why nobody is here. Bummer. Okay, well at least I'm live streaming and I have a few people watching live, so oops, I wonder how I did that. All right, too late now. Can only go forward. But I'm glad that you are here, Sam and Jennifer. Okay, so I am going to start with kind of my 4 goals for this assignment. And those are going to be my performance criteria. So when you're building a rubric, that's the first thing you need to do is you need to identify your performance criteria. What are the things that you want to observe and assess? So as I'm building a rubric, I'm just going to make a table and I'm going to give it 5 rows. The first one I'm going to leave blank for now, and then the next 4 are my 4 criteria that I'm using. So I'm going to do content engagement. You know, are they engaging with content? Are they reading my readings? Are they watching my videos? Are they actually doing something with that?
And that was that first kind of goal.
My first goal is
probably links up really nicely to your learning objectives.
Right, exactly.
Gotcha.
And then my second one was peer engagement. Are they engaging with each other? Are they having some kind of discussion about the content in a way that I feel is substantive and valuable and worthwhile? Then my third one was just going to be writing mechanics. And then my last one I'm just going to call participation. This is just, if I want them to engage with each other, then I probably need to have some kind of basic requirement there so that so that I know that they're doing it and they know that I'm expecting them to do it. So I'm just going to go with probably the standard, if you reply to a couple peers. And there's a lot that goes into that. We've done tech talks in the past on how to design discussions that are more engaging, more productive. So you should go back and watch those if you haven't. But for now, I'm just gonna put participation as my fourth criteria.
Gotcha.
All right, so I have my performance criteria. So what is the objective or the goal of the assignment? What defines success? I want my performance criteria to be observable and measurable. 3 to 6 criteria is usually best. That's what the literature says.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
If you have too many criteria, you know, if you have 10 different criteria levels in your rubric, that's going to be too much. It's going to be overwhelming for students. It's also going to be overwhelming for you. And now you're missing out on the time savings and also that rate of reliability. If you have too many criteria, it's going to be harder to assess that more objectively.
And then maybe something to think about is if you end up in that camp or you notice you have that opportunity for scaffolding.
Yeah.
Break it in half, take some of that, move it into its own rubric, and kind of manage it that way. Gotcha.
Yep, could do that. Okay, so I have my criteria now. So after I have that, then I need to think about performance levels. In other words, if these are my criteria, what does it look like if that is done well, if that's done not so well? And you could have many performance levels. You could just have 2. You could just have met or not met. That's what specs grading often looks like, is these are your requirements, your specifications. Did you do them, yes or no, for each of these criteria? But you can also have more performance levels than that. Again, 3 to 6 performance levels are most common. Too many performance levels, if you have 10 of them, then again, you're missing out on both the efficiency but also the reliability. The literature has also said that it can be best to have more performance levels for formative assessments. So if this is a scaffolded project and you want to provide lots of feedback on that first draft, then you might want to have more performance levels.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Whereas if it's a capstone project or a summative assessment, you maybe only need met or not met, or maybe 3 criteria levels or something like that, where they're no longer looking for that kind of super granular feedback. They just want to know how they performed. So I'm going to make some performance levels here. So to do that, I'm going to add some rows or columns, not rows. And what I think I'm going to do is on this one, I'm going to have 3 performance levels. So I'm going to have a met, a not met, and then I'm also going to have an exceeds expectations level. This is kind of like specs plus, or I've seen this called check, no check, and check plus is something that I think Angela Rasmussen has used in her classes.
Gotcha.
Where there's met is, these are the baseline criteria that I want you to meet in order to earn a passing grade. But there may be some things that I could observe that would demonstrate that you're exceeding those expectations. And I'll get to what that would look like in a second. All right, so there are my performance levels. Once you've done that, then in each one of these cells, then you kind of have to write out a description for that performance level with that performance criteria. So it's usually easiest to start on kind of that base level expectation of what elements do you want them to meet every single time in order to successfully pass the assignment. So for example, content engagement. I need to think about a criteria description that is observable. Like I can't just say, did you understand the content? Well, I don't know if you understood the content. I'm not in your brain, right? So when it comes to a discussion, maybe I need to pare that down to something more like, did you answer all of the discussion prompts? So that would mean that when I'm designing my discussion, I probably need to give specific questions or prompts that I want students to engage with. You know, based on this week's content, answer the following 3 questions. And then I would have to write those questions in a way that if they had been paying attention, read the readings or watched the videos, then they should be able to answer those questions fairly well. So for MET, I'm going to keep this very simple and just you answer all the discussion prompts. I also kind of like doing rubric descriptions in that second person. Did you do it? Not the student, not the learner, just did you do it? Did you answer all the discussion questions? You did? Great, then you met the criteria. Did you not answer all the discussion prompts? You did not address all discussion prompts. That's the not met. So then when I think about the exceeds category, what would kind of take it to the next level to show that they were really paying attention, really engaging, and really going forward with their understanding of the content. So I would still say you answered all the discussion prompts, but additionally, you so there's some observable things that I could see a student do that would demonstrate that they're really engaging with that content. You answered all the discussion prompts, but additionally, you integrated outside resources or relevant research or specific real life applications to support your discussion post. So you could just answer my questions as simply as possible, and that would be met. But if you said, and I think that in my life, I see this playing out in this way, then that demonstrates to me that you are really reflecting on that content and thinking about it application-wise. Similarly for peer engagement, let's keep it simple. Ooh, I got some things here. Ooh, Jennifer's got a screenshot. I'm gonna have to take a look at that later. You also use exceeds to add extra credit to a submission. That's a great way to do it. So I'll talk about how I would score this once I get towards the end here. So for peer engagement, again, I'm just gonna keep this very simple. For that met, I just want a very clear yes or no observable. Did you reply to 2 peers or not? And I want to say thoughtfully and respectfully. In other words, if you're going to be like rude and disrespectful in your reply, then you're not going to, I don't want to give you credit for that. I don't want to say, well, you did it. So I want to make that kind of clear.
Wrong kind of thing.
Yeah. If you didn't meet it, it just means either you didn't reply to enough classmates or you were being disrespectful. And then what does exceeds look like? So again, we start with the baseline. I'm also referencing a specific reflection model here of the what, so what now model is very common content reflection framework. That if I were doing this in class, I would probably share that with them like on the first week of class of when you're reading our stuff, think about what is it, so what, in other words, why does it matter, what now, what could you do because of that information. So I'm being specific about that framework. I'm also going to say or if you're asking insightful questions to your peers, like asking, oh, tell me more. I want to know more about that thought. Or sharing a respectful alternative viewpoint of, oh, well, did you think about it from this angle? Or, oh, I read that differently. So those are some, what I hope are fairly observable markers of thoughtful engagement. Nick, we were talking about this before, of like, that's kind of hard to do in some subject areas. You were talking about more of a lab-based class where the observables are pretty cut and dry. But if you're talking about something like, you know, a humanities class where it's really about thinking about something, reflecting on it, and then trying to apply it to the real world or to a situation or to a concept, that's a little bit more nebulous. So that's what I'm trying to do here is put some observable elements here that you could point to using a rubric.
Oh, that's super slick.
And then my last two here, writing mechanics and participation. So again, writing mechanics, I'm not an editor, I'm not an English professor, so I want to keep this relatively straightforward and not super punitive. So I'm just going to say, there, see, I didn't even spell it right, but I caught it. So I'm not going to ding them for a few small errors because I make errors all the time. It's more about, is it clear enough that I can understand what you're saying and I can communicate with you because of that. The not met would be, You know, is your writing so poorly formatted or badly written or full of so many errors that like I have a hard time understanding what you're saying? Well, then you're not facilitating communication, and I would not give you full credit for that.
Well, just as you're kind of writing through these, what this rubric's also doing is when you get to the actual design of those prompts, the design of this discussion board assignment, you now know what resources you have to give them for them to be successful. Well, I need something about writing mechanics. For the peer engagement, I need to make sure I teach them that model so that I can observe them using it, and then I have a clear evidence of peer engagement. Like you can kind of hit each of these points. And you could do that to Jennifer Barson's point in the chat through an example or some sort of exemplar, something that shows exactly what I'm looking for, but also acts as that nice boundary or guardrail.
You could almost use this as kind of like a backwards design tool if you wanted to. Of why am I even doing a discussion post in the first place? Because these are the goals that I want to accomplish. I've got that written down in a rubric, and then I can use that rubric as I go back and design each weekly discussion assignment of, am I really accomplishing what I set out to accomplish?
And could work for an essay, could work for a big presentation, whatever you'd be using the rubric for.
Okay, so going back to the writing mechanics, as I was thinking about this, I was looking at this and I thought to myself, that's kind of all I need. I don't really, again, I'm not a strong enough editor, and I'm not going to be that big of a stickler for writing mechanics that I think I need. And
it's not an objective of the course.
It's not an objective of the course. It's not a writing intensive course. So I'm not going to even have that. I'm just going to have met or not met for this. And then the same is for participation. So my participation goal is I would like them to engage with this discussion more than once, right? I don't just want them to roll in on Sunday night, splat something out as their initial post, and then do two quick little replies and be done. I would like them to make a post and then come back later and then see what other people have posted and then do their replies. So that's how I'm gonna build that into the design of the assignment. So that's an arbitrary set of dates, but I would say something like, you know, I would like you to make that first post by Wednesday. And then over the weekend, I want you to do your replies. It could be Friday and Sunday, it could be whatever makes sense in your class schedule. But that's what I have. And then not met is just, you didn't do that.
Like in some rubrics or assignments, this might not be necessary, right? But for a discussion board where peer engagement is an important goal, well, yeah, I need people to have their initial posts, and so there's a logistical thing that happens.
If I want them to do that, I'm going to have to make that part of the assessment, or else they're not going to be motivated to do that. So again, my not met is just you didn't make your post by the due date, or you didn't reply to at least 2 peers. And then again, there's not really an exceeds for that category, so it's just you did it or you didn't. And then, so that's kind of the whole rubric. The other thing that I would do if I'm using this as an analytics scoring rubric is I have to assign point values to each of these performance levels. So for me, I would say not met is just 0 points. You don't get credit for that criteria, that performance criteria if you did
not enough to assess means not.
And then something else that you can do with rubric design is you can weight these categories in different ways. So I could just have 0 points, 1 point, 2 point. But if I do the math on that, it kind of weights things poorly. So after reflect, I'll explain what that means by just doing it. So I'm going to say that met is worth 4 points and it exceeds is worth 5 points. So exceeds, you get a little bit more credit if you did those exceeding expectations observables. So with these criteria, this is a 20-point assignment. If you just met all these requirements, then that would be, I forget, I didn't do the math. It comes out to a B. It comes out to a B level work if you just met all the requirements, which I think is very fair. And then if you did these 2 things, then you would end up with a 90 or 100%. And now you've got A work. So to me, that's how having this weighted system, you just give it a, oh, thank you, Nick. And didn't do the math right. I did the first time. So I actually made that worth 6 points. So 2 extra points if you exceed on content engagement and 2 extra points if you exceed on peer engagement. And Jennifer has a comment in here, having the and can inhibit earning points like reply and write well. Say more, Jennifer.
So on one of your met or not met, you say you replied to less than 2 peers and or you did not reply thoroughly and respectfully. So I feel like that's almost 2 criteria. The replying to and then being respectful, or I don't know. That's just me. I like to I imagine that scientists who like to split and classify.
I can see what you're saying. And I think that kind of comes down to that question of how many criteria do you want to have in the assignment, especially if this is like a very formative assessment, maybe early on in the quarter when you're still modeling what those discussion expectations are. It might make sense to split those up. So if you have one about just kind of that participation logistics of did you reply to 2 peers, and then a different one about substantive and respectful replies or something like that. You might want to do that. Whereas if it's later in the course and you're heading towards the end, maybe it's more of a summative assessment at that point, and maybe you don't need as many criteria. So there's different ways to think about it. I'm not saying one is right or wrong. Just those are the kinds of questions you want to ask yourself as you're designing a rubric. So I'm technically past time, but I will briefly say, because I mentioned this earlier, a rubric is not a one-size-fits-all approach. There are downsides to rubrics in certain situations. Maybe don't use rubrics if you have an activity that requires a lot of creativity or wants to give your students a lot of freedom. Rubrics tend to be pretty prescriptive. So if I want my students to maybe be creative and I want them to do some kind of presentation, but maybe they can do a podcast or a video or they can write a song, they can make a play, I don't care. If I have a prescriptive rubric to assess that, then that makes it less likely that they're going to push themselves beyond that boundary or take some kind of creative risk. So I maybe wouldn't want to use a rubric for a creative project like that. For differentiated instruction, obviously a rubric is not gonna cut it. If different students are working on different kinds of things, again, maybe you have a research project and you're giving them several different options to choose from, you probably can't have one single rubric to assess all those in the same way. And then also activities for personal and individual growth, like a reflection journal kind of activity, where you really just want students to demonstrate their own growth process over time that may look different for different students at different speeds. So maybe a rubric wouldn't be appropriate for that. Or if I was to use one, maybe it would be more of a holistic rubric or a met not met or a single point rubric where I'm really just using it as a feedback tool rather than a grading tool. Okay, I made it through just barely. Happy to hang out for a while and discuss further or answer any questions. But that is everything I wanted to get through it in 25 minutes. Next week, we will talk about actually building this in Canvas using the new rubric interface, which I'm very happy and excited about.
Nice.
So come back next week and we'll talk about that. And I will double check that the Zoom link is working correctly. So hopefully I get everybody to actually come next time.
Zoom always throwing us for loops.
Yeah. I want to see Jennifer's link here.
That's the
Oh, that's evidence of my mistake on the okay. Yes, I messed up I don't know how I did that either. Weird. Shame. Yeah, shame. All right, I'm gonna stop the live stream now and hide my embarrassment. Thanks for coming, everybody.
I love that Jennifer annotated it. Like that's the most Jennifer thing